So, I am really excited to talk about this today, especially in light of the bid for the World Cup, which was officially submitted at the end of July. So, what I'm going to do today for the deep dive is talk about another podcast episode, which we've used content from Sukrat in the past with Omar al-Jarasi. So, this is an interview that aired on July 9th, where Omar hosted His Royal Highness, His Excellency, Abdulaziz bin Turki al-Faisal, who's the Minister of Sports. And they had a really candid discussion about sports with a focus on football. Prince Abdulaziz began the discussion by noting that there is a race against time to realize the ambitions of the sports industry in the kingdom, especially in light of His Royal Highness, the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's Vision 2030, and as a route to enhance the quality of life. But specifically in regard to football, he notes it's not just about entertainment, but it's about building an industry and a business opportunity, as well as a way of life within the kingdom. And considering all of the feedback that we normally get about sports in the kingdom, I thought it was really important to kind of contextualize what's happening inside the kingdom in the recruitment process and the idea of how we're building these teams, these clubs in the Saudi Pro League out. So what the Minister of Sports talks about is he begins with kind of this player acquisition center of excellence description and what's happening there. So there's this entity called PACE, Player Acquisition Center Excellence, which is supposed to really help the clubs recruit. And this is where all of the headlines come from, right? Who are they recruiting? Which clubs are they coming from? And how much are they paying them? He really laid out the details here from the perspective of developing talent. So basically, there's an interest within the kingdom as well as from outside of the kingdom to develop the clubs, the local ones. He talks a little bit about privatization, and I'm going to get to that. But basically, there's, the sports club support strategy, which was the idea of the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, and that is financial support for all of the clubs. The sports club support strategy regulates financial structures and procedures. It defines the financial efficiency criteria for the clubs. The strategy is defined as a program based on several pillars, aiming, amongst other things, to develop the financial and administrative system of the clubs, improve the facilities, encourage practitioners to engage in various sports in the club, and increase attendance rates. And it's one of the initiatives of the Ministry of Sports, which includes workshops that, have really tried to upskill the staff and the recruitment arms of these different clubs. And during the workshops, they have, they also support with the strategic plans. Like, how do you determine what your needs are as a club? How do you determine which players you might need? And how do you determine which facilities you might need to develop further? So it really has been kind of the way that the Ministry of Sports has been able to support the clubs. And basically, they want the clubs to have more than just one sport, right? They want there to be multiple different sports, football being just one of them. So El-Jarasi then talks about the PACE, the player acquisition program, on the back of kind of this idea of the development of the different clubs. And he points out that PACE wasn't managed in the same way that the financial support programs were managed, and that there's been a lot of criticism about how the recruitment and attraction of different players was done inside the kingdom. There's been quite a bit of discussion about whether or not there's fairness in which clubs are able to attract which players and whether or not the monetary support is happening at an equal level. So the minister really believes that they are serving each and every club equally and that they want all of the clubs to do well. Because actually one of the key performance indicators and the goals of football in the kingdom is to be one of the top 5 pro leagues globally. So they're trying to really elevate everybody. And recruiting Ronaldo, for instance, was a really big opportunity to elevate the Saudi Pro League. And that process highlighted the importance of managing and regulating the whole idea of recruiting. after they'd gone through the process with Ronaldo. The top four clubs know what the budget is from now until 2027 and how much funding they can access to recruit international players. This kind of excludes some of the superstars. Like if Messi was on the recruitment list, then they might make some adjustments in terms of what the budget would be. But really, so far, 97 players were recruited. Only 21 of those are in the top four clubs, and all of the clubs have received financial support. And the ones with bigger fan bases are able to get bigger names because they also are more attractive to these players. But the governance process really does entail an application to PACE from the club, and they really need to make their case for why they want those players. Do they need a better striker? Is it a goalkeeper that is going to make their team stronger? They need to build their case, and the training that they offer helps these clubs build those cases. And there needs to be consensus within the club that these are the players that they want to recruit. There was this discussion, again, that he brought up about Mo Salah, who was asking for an astronomical amount of money, way more than Neymar, Benzema, Ronaldo had asked for. But he also wasn't going to come to the kingdom and be part of Al-Ittihad. He would have been on loan from Liverpool just for 1 year. And still, they would be paying more than the other players. So, it's not always worth it to pay the amounts that are being asked. And there is a decision-making process that goes into it. So they're developing the clubs, the stadiums, they're raising the standards. In 2019, the Saudi Pro League was only played in 12 stadiums that were fully equipped to host the games. Now in 2024, 23 stadiums are equipped. And these are equipped in a way that is complying with the, standards of Asian Football Confederation, the International Football Confederation. So they're really upping the game inside the kingdom and making these facilities more lucrative for the players, but also for the supporters to come and watch the games in the clubs. He believes that money is not the only solution. It definitely helps, but there are skills and qualifications that need to develop in order to really rise up and enhance the Saudi Pro League. So clubs can pay out of pocket to recruit more players and do different things. But if they want to benefit from the financial support, then they need to go through the process with the ministry. And if they also want to recruit a player, then they have to do that process as well, because they get the financial support for the different players. So at the end of the interview, he alluded to the announcement of the official submission of the World Cup bid, which was submitted at the end of July. And so we now know that there will be 128 training centers that are necessary. I think it's actually more. I think it was 132 training venues across 15 cities that will be the base camps for the 48 teams, including 72 base camp training sites, with referees scheduled to have access to referee base camp training sites. The formal bid outlines 5 proposed host cities for the FIFA World Cup 2034, Riyadh, Jeddah, Khobar, Abha, and Neom. There's going to be 15 advanced stadiums, including 11 new planned stadiums. We've talked about several of these on the show already, and that includes the new King Salman Stadium, which is going to accommodate over 92,000 spectators. It's set to host the opening and final matches of the tournament and will become the new home ground for the Saudi national team. Again, also Mohammed bin Salman Stadium in Riyadh, the one that's going to be covered in LED screen. There's the new Jeddah Central Development Stadium. There's going to be the Al Khobar Aramco Stadium, which symbolizes whirlpools that appear off the coast during warm summer months. And in Abha, King Khalid University Stadium and Neom is expected to be one of the most distinctive and iconic stadiums in the world. The stadium will be situated within the line, more than 350 meters above ground. It will provide an unprecedented and exceptional experience for fans scheduled to attend the tournament, and so on. I mean, there's so much that was in this bid that was announced. It's very exciting, and my social media is exploding with people, posting about it and talking about how excited they are for the bid, for the new stadiums, and to host the World Cup. So that was, the interview with His Excellency Prince Abdulaziz Turki Al-Faisal, Minister of Sports, on Sukrat.
Yeah, I mean, Hannah, at this rate, I think we should pretty much just talk about football every single week on this podcast, because every time we do that, a new stadium gets announced and we're like on quite a roll. We did a deep dive on all the new stadiums they're doing. Of course, since then, the King Salman Stadium was announced. As you mentioned, they will be doing the opening game and the ceremonies and all of that. And then the final match will be played at that stadium. And then, as you also mentioned, the new stadium was announced at Neom, which is super rad. It's like suspended above the, looks like it's in the line, and then it's, it's sort of like elevated above the ground. It's kind of hard to describe. You actually just have to like look it up online. It's amazing. So great deep dive. I love this because I'm not getting this. Sokrat isn't Arabic, so I'm not listening to it. It's not on my radar. And they are terrific. They have obviously terrific interviews. And this is why I love this, because it's like, okay, this is all new information for me, even as somebody who's very attuned to what's going on in Saudi Arabia. So awesome job. So I just have a few comments to make. First is that when you're building out a sports team, let alone a league, but when you're building out a sports team, there are so many people involved in the organization if the organization needs to be successful. And those people must be competent operators in the club. Often these guys are no-name people that are just rolling up their sleeves and doing all of the work that is completely behind the scenes. And in the United States, where we both are recording this podcast, I don't know if you knew this, Dr. Hanaa, but 93 of the top 100 TV programs last year in the United States were American football games, obviously with the Super Bowl being number one, the most viewed thing. This is a big business if you do it right. And it's the same thing with all the well-established leagues around the world. In Saudi Arabia, what you have is sort of an effort to stand up an existing league with a combination of state money and PIF money in the hope that you can create an ecosystem that attracts investment in. I'm very interested in the comments you made about how the Prince Abdulaziz bin Turki Al Faisal discusses fairness, because that's something that unless he directly addresses it, you're never really going to have a direct answer on it. But if you're trying to build a team, you need these competent operators. You really need to have a very well-run organization. As a Washington Redskins, now Commanders fan, since I was a little boy, and in the last 20 years has been just unbelievably incompetently run. It was one of the greatest teams in American football. Haven't won really anything since then, and now they have all new ownership. What I can see happening in that organization now is a new owner who knows what he's doing, and that's where it starts, right at the top. The new owner hires competent people underneath him to do football operation, and the new owner does not meddle in those decisions because he may think that because he has $6 billion, which is what they sold for, that he knows everything, but he really doesn't. These people, the scouts, the people running food and beverage concessions, all of them work together as a team in a very, very well-run operation if you want to be a winner, and all of those things matter. When you're building a league out from scratch, which is not, again, what's happening, the league has been in existence for decades, but when you're just making a new revitalized effort to create a global league out of a local league, you need to do what I just mentioned, competent operators in clubs at scale. That does involve training. It also involves financial assistance to get things stood up. It requires, as you sort of alluded to, as discussed in this interview, fairness when it comes to who gets money and who's getting training and all of that. I don't know if it is possible for there to be fairness in the Saudi Pro League right now, because you have how many teams? 26 teams or 31 teams? Actually, I'm not really sure, but you have many teams. You have different levels, right? So is Al Fayha didn't get Ronaldo. Is Al Fayha going to this organization Pace and, requesting assistance? Are they, asking to be treated fairly? Are they saying, hey, we need a marquee player to develop our stadium and our fan base so that we can compete and eventually sell? I don't know if it's possible to have true fairness in a situation like this, but you can effort to get to fairness. True fairness comes in the end game, which the PIF and Saudi authorities know is in total private ownership of these leagues. Whether or not you have a salary cap or not, you need an independent operator making investments into players from around the world, or ideally, and I know this is also on their radar, developing local talent so you don't have to pay Ronaldo $250 million and give him a suite at the Four Seasons in Riyadh. You are developing these players. So that goes to my point of when you're building the ecosystem, you go team by team. Ideally, these people are all doing it together independently, because competition in that sense breeds a better league. And if you look at the NFL, they're all privately owned. There's no, state investment except for tax-free status, which is the subject of debate for the NFL. But all of these owners are trying to win. They already own the club. They're making investments into players and staff. There's a salary cap because the league does so well. So it isn't unfair like in Major League Baseball where there's no salary cap. If you're the Yankees, you can buy any player you want. Still doesn't mean you're going to win. Two different ways of doing it. But in the Saudi Pro League, you really need to have fairness. But before you get there, you need the investment to make it the type of thing that other people, private citizens, want to invest in. And so I'm not really sure if you can reach that level of fairness, but as long as you're trying and as long as you're making it clear to everybody that, hey, His Royal Highness isn't just a fan of one club or two clubs. He's a fan of the league and he's a fan of the development of the league. We have talked a lot about sports on this podcast, which obviously makes me very happy. But we recently had an interview with Fatima Batouk, who talked a little bit about what they're doing in different sports like tennis and also the development of healthy lifestyles, which is all key to getting this thing to be sustainable. You really want to have a heavy mixture of young Saudis entering the league, and then you want to have players that really want to play here, not just because of money, but because the league is competitive. So I just wanted to kind of make that point about sort of if you're doing this, first of all, you need to understand it's going to take a lot of time and effort. Second of all, as he made the point, it's not just money because money can buy you players. The players could come in, they could leave, and nothing really changes. It's a wasted investment. But if you're building out a league where you're building out core competencies in these organizations and you're developing local talent when it comes to sports, and you are also creating real investment opportunities, it actually seems like the Saudi Pro League right now would be a great investment opportunity if a team were to come for sale because you could essentially say, look, I see where this thing's going. There's a lot of investment now. The trend is up. The World Cup is coming. Players are going to want to play here. These new stadiums are dope. Like it seems like a buy from where I sit. And I think that trend is in the right direction. So it's really cool to see Abdulaziz bin Turki Al Faisal come on and discuss at least where his headspace is at, what they're doing from an organizational standpoint with these at the very top, really, and setting up organizations like PACE to make things more fair. Because the end game cannot be that there is just the state investing into the league. The end game has to be private ownership, real competition, and perceived fairness from fans that if another team has a better player than they have, that it's not just favoritism. So very cool, great topic, I think, and also really cool to get this on our radar. We're a show in English. A lot of our listeners are in the West, in the US and Europe. They're very interested in sports and everything going on in Saudi Arabia, but they may not have seen this interview or may not have heard it. So it's very cool, and I loved it. Yeah, thank you.
No, absolutely. And I just wanted to pick up on a couple points that he did actually address head on because Omar he throws some hard balls during these interviews, which I think are really important. So, when His Excellency was talking about privatization, Omar was like, he didn't really privatize. It went from one government entity to another government entity, like PIF is government. And the point that he was making there was that actually it means that we can have a separate kind of governing body and a separate department that's dealing with the club. So it's going kind of in stages into private ownership, and that's how they see it. He brought up an example of the Spanish league, and and it was something that he was like, we need to fact check this, but he believes that there was an example of privatizing too quickly and then the state having to kind of intervene and come back and take over some of these clubs for them not to collapse. And they don't want that to happen. So the process of these clubs moving to PIF and the other government entities was done in cooperation with the Saudi National Center for Privatization, which helped ensure that the investment was lucrative. They didn't want to privatize immediately. They wanted PIF to buy the clubs, grow the clubs, enhance their skills, their capabilities, protect it from failure. You don't want some private entity to come in, buy a club, have it completely fail because the whole league isn't propped up properly, and then deter future investments in this space. So I think there's a rationale behind not going private too quickly. And the other thing I wanted to talk about in terms of fairness, which is such an important point, and obviously, again, there was an admission that there are clubs that are benefiting more than others. The process is now the same for everybody, but they're looking at performance proportionate to spending. And that's a really interesting angle and an important point that he made. So many of the clubs are failing to perform right? And the Saudi national team is often failing to perform in even regional competitions, despite all of this investment in the clubs and their development. So they might compete against Oman and fail. And people are like, well, you're spending all of this money and you're developing these clubs. Why are we not doing more, doing better than these clubs that don't have a fraction of our budget? And so, this is where the whole money helps, but it's not enough comes in. And he responds to this by highlighting that they know that that's not going to be enough. And that's why clubs now have to have 3-year plans for developing their teams, where if there are new players that they want or are applying for more funding, these applications have to be revised against the club's strategy. Are you going to improve your performance? If you have a plan to build a competitive and professional team, what's your goal? Is it, one cup that you're competing for? Is it a specific championship? Is it all of the above? You'll get the support if you can make your case. And the professional level of playing will not happen overnight. The skills will not be developed today. You have to come with an application that makes sense, and you need to retain your team and build that team kind of culture as a club in order for you then to be considered for some of these applications. I think he was really transparent about the fact that, some clubs are going to get more funding because they're doing a better job at selling tickets, at selling jerseys, at commercializing what they're doing in a way where they are building a business out of their club, and they're making a profit, and they're making it, again, lucrative for people to come and watch these games in these stadiums that are being built. That needs to happen. You need a fan base that's engaged, and I think that's important.
Well, but it is easier to get the fan base and be engaged if you're getting the investment into these clubs. And even if you are submitting these plans, you're still going to a final arbiter that says yes or no. And that is where people are going to question the fairness part of this, is like, what if the plan is amazing, but one of the decision makers roots for Al Fayha and it says, no, there's no way that I want Al Ittifaq to get this guy, because then we would have less of a chance of winning. But either way, imagine what it would be like if they did nothing. It's the classic Vision 2030 discussion you can have on almost every topic. You can poke holes or find problems with things that are happening in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, but you must always consider what would happen without the vision. If you didn't have any reform at all, the Saudi Pro League would be way down in rankings, by the way, way off 18 teams in the Saudi Pro League, the Roshan Pro League, so fail for Lucien. But you need sort of a jolt of life, and that jolt of life is going to sometimes seem unfair, and sure, the investment is going to be imbalanced unless you give every team the same amount of money. That's not a good investment for the state. So this sort of is the best way to do it if you're going to do it, and doing nothing is not a good solution. If this is the end game that you want, is a vibrant league, globally recognized, players being pulled out of Saudi to go elsewhere because they're that good and that valuable, all of those things you need to develop. And as you noted, it takes time, just like Vision 2030 takes time. When it was announced, it was so big and so ambitious, it was really hard to even wrap your head around. So it's very easy to be negative about it and say, well, I don't know, I don't think so. This seems like a lot. But you just get going, you start doing the work, you don't listen to naysayers, you keep going with your vision, you make adjustments as you go, you follow the KPIs where they go. And where you end up is absolutely more advanced and in a better position than you would be if you did nothing at all. So very cool, and really great that he is getting out there. And as you said, he was transparent. I mean, having very tough questions asked of him and answering as honestly and truthfully as he can about what they're doing and maybe what the perceptions are about fairness. I think that's really important, that people see that and people understand that there's an effort that's, in design to be fair. So really, really cool.